Hi, Bobcats. In this video, we're going to take a look at valence shell electron pair repulsion theory, and it's a little bit much for one video, so we're going to start by looking at VSEPR for 2 and 3 domains. And so also in this section, we're going to take a quick look at all of the ideas behind VSEPR theory and then use those ideas to look at the structures with 2 and 3 domains. When we go to draw VSEPR structures, we're going to start with a Lewis dot structure. The Lewis dot structures give us two-dimensional information about how the atoms are connected to each other. For instance, if we're going to draw the Lewis dot structure of methane, CH4, we would put the carbon in the middle, we would put the 4 hydrogens around it, and we'd arrange things so that hydrogen has its duet and oxygen has its octet. And that results in the structure that we've drawn down here on the left. This structure shows us exactly what atom's connected to what other atom. But VSEPR structures give us even more information. They're going to give us information about the three-dimensional shape of a molecule. And so, for instance, this structure that's drawn on the lower right is one way that we draw VSEPR structures. And you'll notice if you compare what we have on the right with what we have on the left, if we were going to look at what bond angle would be predicted by these structures, the Lewis dot structure appears to have 90-degree or right angles on all of the carbon-hydrogen or hydrogen-carbon-hydrogen bonds. But the VSEPR structure is actually predicting something bigger than 90 degrees. As we will learn soon, it predicts 109.5 degrees. And so that's a pretty big difference in bond angle, and it turns out that the VSEPR prediction matches what we see experimentally. So why do we care about the three-dimensional shape? Well, the three-dimensional shape of a molecule is directly connected to so many aspects of its chemistry, like the types of reactions that it will or will not undergo. Parts of its spectroscopy, or how it interacts with light, are dependent upon its shape. And something that's probably very relevant for spring of 2020 is the biological reactivity of molecules is extremely dependent on their shapes. And this link here will take you to an article about researchers discovering the three-dimensional shape of a protein in the coronavirus and how important that is in trying to develop a vaccine. So there's one term that I'm going to need to define before we jump into VSEPR theory, and that is the concept of an electron domain. An electron domain is any cloud or any cluster of charge that's on the central atom in the structure we're analyzing. That cluster or that cloud can be due to any one of the following. It could be due to a single unpaired electron in a species we call a radical. It could be a lone pair. It could be a bonding pair that's in a single bond, or it could be a double bond, or it could be a triple bond. Any of those things counts as one domain. So a triple bond counts as one domain, just as a single bond counts as one domain, and just as a single electron counts as one domain. So any one of those things gets counted as one domain. So the name of this new theory is valence shell electron pair repulsion theory, and it pretty much is what it sounds like. We're going to be looking only at valence shell electrons. But one thing that's really kind of a misnomer on this is that word pair. So let's cross that out and let's replace that with domain. Now, officially the theory is still called VSEPR theory with the P in there for pair, but it really refers to domains. And so any domains will fall under this description that we're about to develop. So here are the big ideas. Domains are negatively charged because they consist of clouds of electrons. That means that domains will repel each other because one domain with its negative charge will repel another domain that has that same negative charge. Because of this repulsion, the domains that are on a central atom in a molecule will spread out as far as possible from one another. So our procedure for figuring out VSEPR structures will be to start with the Lewis structure, because that will help us identify what's the central atom, what are the outside atoms, what sort of domains are we working with, are they single bonds, double bonds, triple bonds, lone pairs. And then we will just simply let those domains repel each other in 3 dimensions and separate and get themselves as far apart from one another as they can, and that will create our VSEPR structure. Let's start with a molecule that has 2 domains around the central atom, which is carbon dioxide. I started us here with the Lewis dot structure. And often in working homework problems, you'll have to draw the Lewis structure first before you can draw the VSEPR structure, but we're starting with it here. Carbon is the central atom, and it's surrounded by 2 oxygen atoms. By the time you put in all of the pairs of electrons that make it up, you end up with a double bond between carbon and each one of those 2 oxygens. So if we focus on the central atom, and that's what we're always going to focus on with VSEPR structures, we're going to focus on that central atom. So if we look just at that central carbon atom, we'll see that it has 2 domains. One domain is this double bond, and the other domain is this double bond. So with 2 domains, if we go to draw the VSEPR structure, well, let's start with that central atom, and then the first domain we can draw anywhere. So I'm just going to draw it over here. Now that second domain is going to repel that first domain as far as it can. So if you look over here at our VSEPR structure, there's a lot of repulsion going on here between these 2, which is going to cause these 2 domains to spread out as much as they can. So one way to think about this is that this top domain is going to get pushed over. If it goes past being horizontal, then it starts getting repulsions along the bottom side. So really putting that second domain on the opposite side of the carbon from the first domain is going to minimize those repulsions and get these domains as far apart from one another as possible. So our VSEPR structure for carbon dioxide will look something like this. Let's talk about some of the stuff that goes with this structure. First of all, when we draw VSEPR structures, very often lone pairs are omitted on the outside atoms, which are the oxygens in this case, but you always must draw the lone pairs on any central atoms. In this case, the carbon doesn't have any lone pairs, so there are none to show. Another thing I wanted to point out is that to put these oxygens on the opposite sides of one another, that gives us a bond angle here of 180 degrees, which is the bond angle in a line. And so that's how the shape is named. The name of this shape is linear. So if you're asked on a test or a quiz to draw the VSEPR structure for carbon dioxide, and then from that you might be asked questions about the structure, you need to be able to say that it's a linear structure and that it has a bond angle of 180 degrees. So let's look at the case of 3 domains, which is what happens with a structure like formaldehyde. So I've given you the Lewis dot structure of formaldehyde here on the left. Let's take a look at what those 3 domains are. We have a single bond right there, that's one domain. We have a double bond, another single bond right there, and we have a double bond there. So that gives us a grand total of 3 domains. those three domains want to arrange themselves around that central atom as much as they can. Notice the way this Lewis dot structure is written, it looks like we've got bond angles of 90 degrees and 180 degrees because everything in Lewis dot structures ends up with 90 or 180. But think about how the electron domains repel each other. So the domain between the C double bond O and the CH will be pushing, and likewise over here on the other side they'll be pushing against each other. So that's going to cause these single bonds to move down a bit, and they'll move until they start pushing against each other down there at the bottom. So basically we want to spread those three domains out in space as much as we can, which is going to result in these domains pointing towards the corners of an equilateral triangle. And that's going to result in a bond angle of 120 degrees. And the name that we give to this shape is trigonal planar. So trigonal because it's like a triangle, and planar because all four atoms in this molecule end up in the same plane. In this video, we looked at some of the key ideas behind VSEPR theory. We introduced the concept of a domain, which is any localized cluster of electrons. And then we used the idea that domains are going to repel each other and push as far away from one another as they can to predict what the structures with 2 and 3 domains would look like. With 2 domains, we called that structure linear with a bond angle of 180 degrees. And with 3 domains, we called the structure trigonal planar, and it has a bond angle associated with it of 120 degrees.